All right, a conservative advocacy group called the American Principles Project sent a letter yesterday that warned Republican lawmakers and staffers to be aware of third-party lobbyists who receive funding from big tech in an attempt to influence public policy on the right and co-opt the Republican Party. Joining us now is the man who wrote that letter, the Director of Policy and Government Affairs at the American Principles Project, Jon Schweppe. Jon, good to see you. So I guess the goal here is to say, hey, just because they're not a big tech lobbyist from Facebook doesn't mean that they're not funding a group that is coming to your office trying to influence you on policy. Is that the nut of this?
Right. Well, it's kind of an open secret in Washington that big tech has been funding a lot of the center-right ecosystem, all these think tanks and organizations, for quite some time. And that's only increased as their censorship has increased because they understand they got to try to convince the Republicans to stay away from them, to leave them alone. And so a lot of these groups, they have names that kind of hearken the Tea Party movement. They sound like they might be representing grassroots conservatives, but the reality is they're just representing what big tech companies want. And I think it's important both for your viewers at home and for members of Congress, senators, their staffs to understand how this dynamic is working, and that, those are folks who maybe shouldn't have as much of an influence on this conversation as they did in the past.
Jon, you sent this letter yesterday to Republican lawmakers. What was the response to from them?
I think, we've actually seen a lot of movement on this issue, which is kind of really encouraging. You have a group like Heritage Foundation, for example, which came out at the end of last year as the censorship was taking place during the election cycle, and they disavowed these donations and said, hey, we're done working with you guys. That's happening in Congress, too. So you're seeing more members of Congress, more senators willing to call out big tech. And now the question is, what are we going to do about it? President Trump talked a lot about Section 230. Should we do some reform there? Maybe we should look at antitrust enforcement. But the reality is these groups are saying don't do anything. And the reason they're saying that is because they're getting big checks from big tech companies. That's why they pay them, right? So I think it's important to kind of discredit these groups on this particular issue. Maybe they have important things to add on other issues, but when it comes to this, it's too important to just let this go.
So how do you get the word out? You mentioned Heritage is, I assume, not taking the money. So what's the goal? To make sure that these guys know who these groups are?
That's correct. So, when we're talking about Section 230 reform and, hopefully we're going to take back the House and the Senate in the 2022 elections. So there may even be bills that are introduced and hopefully considered for passage. These groups that are on the payroll of Google and Facebook really shouldn't have that much influence on the process. And that's kind of the goal here. Really, it's just it's honesty. But this is how Washington works. These groups give you a grant, and the purpose of the grant is for you to accomplish, A, B, C, D, and E. If you do, then you get more money the next year. And that's how the ecosystem works on a lot of corporate funding. But with big tech, we know what happened in 2020. President Trump effectively lost the election by 43,000 votes when you look at the 3 states in question. And big tech censorship played a huge role in that. Google messing with the algorithms, preventing conservative news media from showing up. Facebook removing conservative super PAC ads, and of course censoring lots of people. Jack Dorsey at Twitter censoring everyone to the right of Mao. So we have to do something about this. And the groups that are just saying no, 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 well, they're saying it for a reason, and it's because they're funded by Google and Facebook.
All right, Jon, I want you to do them a favor. When you get a response, let us know, and I'd like to hear what the response becomes, after a little while from these Republican lawmakers.
Absolutely. We'll stay in touch.